Well, the Paladin class talents and then the Holy talents got revamped, and while there are many things that didn't happen that I really, really wish would have happened, all the things that did happen were definitely steps in the right direction, and I feel like it's just barely good enough to get me to actually buy Dragonflight territory. It's not gotten me excited to play it, mind you. They'll need to do better than this to get into excited territory, and honestly, Blizzard can and should do better, but at least this gets me into the game. First, let's talk about the class talents. They still have the trichotomy of defensive talents on the left, offensive talents on the right, and cooldowns down the middle. That, sadly, hasn't gone away and given way to a trichotomy of holy, protection, and retribution. Also, sadly, the rebuke talent is too deep and has too many prerequisites and too few ways to reach it. You can't get it unless you have Fist of Justice. Even though it's a cooldown, it's not in the middle. Not that I want cooldowns to be in the middle long term, but if they insist on cooldowns being in the middle, at least they could put Rebuke there where it's nice and accessible to all, the way cooldowns should be. And then there was this one talent, a talent that made Judgment provide holy power, and they sadly took that out of Holy's reach. It was in the class tree before, and it's gone now, and that is sad. The one silver lining is that the lower area of the class tree, it's much more connected now than it was before the revamp, and that additional player freedom is good and is a step in the right direction, but honestly, Blizzard needs to rethink a lot of the Paladin class tree, and the boring old auras are still in the tree instead of being baselined. Honestly, it's like Blizzard never got the memo that auras are boring and nice and interesting on-demand damage abilities like Hammer of the Righteous and especially Denounce make class trees exciting. I mean, having a damage ability with no cooldown is so much more fun than not having a damage ability with no cooldown. And the spellbook casting animation Paladins have is practically begging to be paired with a projectile damage spell, and there are edge cases where Retribution or Protection would be able to use Denounce, and active damage abilities are so much more interesting when they're in the class tree as opposed to cramming all the damage abilities into the spec tree. How I wish they'd unprune Denounce and put it in the class tree already. I'd have even taken Denounce, even if it was in the Holy Tree, but it isn't. It isn't even baselined for the spec. And that's just the start of the disappointments there. Talents that are useful for the melee playstyle, like Divine Toll, Glimmer of Light, Shining Savior, Radiant Onslaught, and especially Crusader's Might, are way over on the left-hand side of the tree, underneath casting talents like Holy Light, Illumination, Resplendent Light, and Divine Favor. And contrary-wise, talents useful to the casting playstyle like Power of the Silver Hand, Tears Deliverance, Imbued Infusions, Tower of Radiance, which still has the wrong icon by the way, and Inflorescence of the Sunwell are over on the right, underneath the melee talents like Light of the Martyr and Unending Light. On the plus side, there are some talents that are great additions, at least insofar as they're in the Holy Talent tree in general. Their placement could use work, but the fact that they're there now and weren't there before, and I'm happy about that, means that Blizzard has made steps in the right direction. Inflorescence of the Sunwell was one of the great legendary effects of Shadowlands for caster Holy Paladins, and Resplendent Light, it's not Holy Radiance. It doesn't give me the flow that Holy Radiance, Holy Shock, Light of Dawn, Rinse and Repeat gave me back in the glory days of Mists and Warlords, and it turns Holy Light from an efficient heal into a splash heal, albeit one that doesn't have enough splash healing for me to use it as an oh snap my group needs heals fast AoE heal per se, the way Holy Radiance could. I'd be happier with Holy Radiance than I am now with Resplendent Light, but Resplendent Light's healing throughput is very efficient. It had no cooldown, the way Holy Radiance didn't in Mists and Warlords, and I'm glad of those aspects of it at the very least. It's like this is a consolation prize. Holy Radiance is the real prize, though, and I am missing it. One other thing that looks a little strange is the way they re-added but didn't re-add the Hammer of the Vanquisher Necrolord Covenant ability with the Empyrean Empowerment passive that shares an octagon slot with Inflorescence. The way Hammer of the Vanquisher works is it's a damage ability with a 30-second cooldown, and after you cast it, your single-target Holy Power Spender also triggers your multi-target Holy Power Spender. And for Holy, that means a free Light of Dawn whenever you cast Word of Glory. And now, why in the maw did Blizzard feel the need to attach that get-a-free finisher effect to Judgment instead of just plain and simple bringing Hammer of the Vanquisher back and putting it in the Holy Talent tree? Once again, Blizzard doesn't seem to have gotten the memo that it's better to give us 2 buttons that each do one thing than 1 button that does 2 things. There's more player control, more simplicity, and more excitement in having more buttons to press than just adding passives that pile more and more functionality onto a single button until it reaches the point where that functionality becomes self-contradictory and confusing. Granted, Judgment of Light plus Empyrean Power doesn't get us to that point yet, but bringing Hammer of the Vanquisher into the Holy Tree or even into the class talents is a better move than what they're doing here with Judgment. But another thing that makes me glad is how they're actually explaining why they have the caster and melee talents scuffled all over the place instead of organized into 2 halves like so many Paladin players have been suggesting. It means they are listening. Not to me specifically, since Denounce isn't there, but at least they're realizing what players want and why they want it, and they're responding to those wants, even if they aren't giving them to us yet. I strongly suspect that when the Storm, Earth, and Fire expansion after Dragonflight rolls around, and the talent trees are more mature as a system and they've had more experience working with them, Blizzard will split the tree up into a melee half and a caster half. Maybe it won't happen, but we'll see. The way it seems to go is the players get what they want and have been asking for, but only get it after Blizzard has experimented with the things Blizzard thinks is going to work in spite of our repeated requests for what we want. Finally, Blizzard caves and does what the players have been asking them to do when the truth that their ideas didn't work finally hits them. In the meanwhile, at least we have some cool stuff to play around with. All of this being said, it would be nicer if Blizzard just skipped the steps where they do what they want and jump straight to the part where they give us what we want, but hey, you can't win them all, especially with the design philosophies that Blizzard sticks to. Another cool thing is what they did with Infusion of Light. They baselined it. That means there are fewer caster-style prerequisites for melee talents than there were before, and casters automatically get something vital instead of having to spend talent points to get it. That's good, and I'm expecting to see that as the talent system matures. The talent trees are more exciting when they have new stuff or new possibilities, and less exciting when you have to spend to get stuff you used to get for free. I sure hope Blizzard takes that lesson to heart going forward with their talent designs. Baselining Infusion of Light was a very good move, and even better than what I'd been hoping they would do with it. Unfortunately, Beacon of the Lightbringer isn't in the Holy Tree, and that's one of the things the caster playstyle really needs in order to be viable. I'm a little surprised that they didn't take out Blessing of Seasons and replace it with Beacon of the Lightbringer. But then again, with 67% uptime, maybe Blessing of Seasons is worth a second look. I don't know. But its placement reminds me of when Retribution had Blessing of Kings as its deepest talent back in vanilla before patch 1.9. But I digress. Beacon of the Lightbringer isn't here and really should be. It allowed casters to stand just about wherever they liked instead of being forced to be in melee. Of course, a talent that changes our mastery entirely, so it's what it was in Warlords or Mists, is another perfectly viable idea. I'd say the improved connections and newly enabled paths are the biggest improvements over what we had, with the addition of some cool caster conduits and legendaries being a close second. The fact that there are plenty of melee talents that are in your reach if you skip Holy Light altogether is a major plus, but I still think it would be wiser if a few of the shallower caster talents were over on the left and the shallower melee talents were on the right. Shining Savior is great for a melee style, but it's got Holy Light as a prerequisite, and Imbued Infusions or Tower of Radiance would go great in its place. I mean, the devs have stated that their goal was to encourage players to path around the tree without forcing players to pick on undesirable talents, and Holy Light, as iconic and paladinish as it is only useful for caster builds. As such, it either shouldn't be this shallow in the tree, or else it shouldn't be required to get talents like Shining Savior that are appealing for the melee style. Of course, there's plenty of ways of solving that. Moving Holy Light deeper in the tree would work. Adding a path from Divine Protection to Tears Devotion and from there to Shining Savior would work, or swapping Shining Savior with a shallow casterish talent on the right like Tower of Radiance or as a second choice Imbued Infusions would work. Still, this tree feels more fun and easier to work with than the Holy Talents from before this revamp, and I can't point out any steps Blizzard took that were steps in the wrong direction. The one exception to that was taking out the Holy Paladins can get Holy Power for casting Judgment talent that was in the class tree before these revamps. I still wish they'd modify the fundamental design of the class tree so it's Holy Protection Retribution instead of Defense, Cooldowns, Offense, and that they'd put Rebuke in a more accessible spot. I wish they'd baseline the auras, and above all else, I really, really wish they'd unprune Denounce already. Those are the steps that I want them to take, and the more of those steps they take before Dragonflight launches, the better. But at least every step they've taken since they first unveiled the Paladin and Holy Talents has been a step in the right direction. That is good, but I hope they have time to cover some more ground and further boost the fun factor before Dragonflight launches.